Existentialism is a Humanism by Jean-Paul Sartre. It was to correct common misconceptions about his thought that Sartre accepted an invitation to speak on October 29th, 1945, at the Club Maintenant in Paris. The unstated objective of his lecture was to expound his philosophy as a form of existentialism, a term which was much bandied about in the press at the time. Sartre asserted that existentialism was essentially a doctrine for philosophers, although ironically he was about to make it accessible to a general audience. So we've only read like 7 pages. And in which he says, "My purpose here is to defend existentialism against some charges that have been brought against it by the communists and various other critics who call it bougie. I say it is actually the least bougie and most austere of all philosophies." And the religious people, some of whom are existentialists, but this is more of the atheist existentialists, and especially religious people who think that existentialism means something like profane. My favorite part was, where is it? Recently, someone told me about a lady who, whenever she inadvertently utters some vulgar expression in a moment of anger, excuses herself by saying, "I think I'm becoming an existentialist." And then I guess where we left off was the assertion that man chooses man. If God is dead, or if God never existed, which, we're really splitting the world into 2 parts here. Some people believe in God, some people don't believe in God. Anyways, if you're on the latter, if God does not exist, then man chooses man. And this man chooses donut. And if you are religious, you can be a religious existentialist. I think on that side of things, they mostly believe in free will. Like, the existentialism would be the free will. God did not create you with a predetermined plan. Anyways, much has been debated. Oh, and this term of man is what chooses man is known as existence precedes essence. So first, we exist. And it is only later that our essence will develop. Anyways, you could even say it's been masturbated. If, moreover, existence precedes essence, and we will to exist at the same time as we fashion our image. That image is valid for all and for our whole era. Our responsibility is thus much greater than we might have supposed, because it concerns all mankind. If I am a worker and I choose to join a Christian trade union rather than to become a communist, and if by that membership I choose to signify that resignation is, after all, the most suitable solution for man, and that the kingdom of man is not on this earth, I am not committing myself alone. I am choosing to be resigned on behalf of all. Consequently, my action commits all mankind. Or, to use a more personal example, if I decide to marry and have children, granted such a marriage proceeds solely from my own circumstances, my passion, or my desire, I am nonetheless committing not only myself, but all of humanity to the practice of monogamy. I am therefore responsible for myself and for everyone else. And I am fashioning a certain image of man as I choose him to be. In choosing myself, I choose man. And that's where we left off last week. This allows us to understand the meaning behind some rather lofty sounding words, such as anguish, abandonment, and despair. As you are about to see, it is all quite simple. First, what do we mean by anguish? Existentialists like to say that man is in anguish. This is what they mean. A man who commits himself and who realizes that he is not only the individual that he chooses to be, but also a legislator choosing at the same time what humanity as a whole should be, cannot help but be aware of his own full and profound responsibility. True, many people do not seem especially anguished, or do not appear especially anguished, but we maintain that they are merely hiding their anguish, or trying not to face it. Certainly, many believe that their actions involve no one but themselves. And were we to ask them, what if everyone acted that way? They would shrug their shoulders and reply, but everyone does not act that way. In truth, however, one should always ask oneself, what would happen if everyone did what I am doing? Foxdew, I hope you're joking, but that wasn't the point of what he said. It's a definition of the word. I gotta remember I can't read chat. Okay. We're fine. Yeah, that's okay. Because on the one hand, I would love to, explain any questions. But then on the other hand, I'm like, no, I gotta keep reading because, I can't keep interrupting. But you're fine. You're fine. It's me. And if were we to ask them, what if everyone acted this way? They would shrug their shoulders and reply, but everyone does not act this way. In truth, however, one should always ask oneself, what would happen if everyone did what I am doing? And the only way to evade that disturbing thought is through some kind of bad faith. Someone who lies to himself and excuses himself by saying everyone does not act that way is struggling with a bad conscience. For the act of lying implies attributing a universal value to lies. Anguish can be seen even when concealed. This is the anguish that Kierkegaard called the anguish of Abraham. You know the story. An angel orders Abraham to sacrifice his son. This would be okay, provided it really is an angel who appears to him and says, "Thou, Abraham, shalt sacrifice thy son." But any sane person may wonder first whether it is truly an angel, and second, whether I am really Abraham. What proof do I have? There was once a mad woman suffering from hallucinations who claimed that people were phoning her and giving her orders. The doctor asked her, "But who exactly speaks to you?" She replied, "He says it is God." How did she actually know for certain that it was God? If an angel appears to me, what proof do I have that it is an angel? Or if I hear voices, what proof is there that they come from heaven and not hell? Or from my own subconscious? Or some pathological condition? What proof is there that it was intended for me? What proof is there that I am the proper person to impose my conception of man on humanity? I will never find proof at all, nor any convincing sign of it. If a voice speaks to me, it is always I who must decide whether or not this is the voice of an angel. If I regard a certain course of action as good, it is I who will choose to say that it is good, rather than bad. There is nothing to show that I am Abraham, and yet I am constantly compelled to perform exemplary deeds. Everything happens to every man as if the entire human race were staring at him and measuring itself by what he does. So, every man ought to ask himself, am I really a man who is entitled to act in such a way that the entire human race should be measuring itself by my actions? And if he does not ask himself that, he masks his anguish. Good thing I'm exempt from this because I'm a woman. The anguish we are concerned with is not the kind that would lead to quietism or despair. Sorry, inaction, not despair. The anguish we are concerned with, is this not my beautiful house? Is this not my beautiful wife? Oops. The anguish we are concerned with is not the kind that could lead to quietism or inaction. It is anguish, pure and simple, of the kind experienced by all who have borne responsibilities. For example, when a military leader takes it upon himself to launch an attack and sends a number of men to their deaths, he chooses to do so and ultimately makes that choice alone. Some orders may come from his superiors, but their scope is so broad that he is obliged to interpret them. And it is on his interpretation that the lives of 10, 14, or 20 men depend. In making such a decision, he is bound to feel some anguish. All leaders have experienced that anguish, but it does not prevent them from acting. To the contrary, it is the very condition of their action. For they first contemplate several options, and in choosing one of them, realize that its only value lies in the fact that it was chosen. It is this kind of anguish that existentialism describes. And as we shall see, it can be made explicit through a sense of direct responsibility toward the other men who will be affected by it. It is not a screen that separates us from action, but a condition of action itself. This book is actually a speech that was given in 1945, yes. The only troubling part about not finishing this all in one day is that it was originally given as a speech, so it was all one part, including questions at the end, but I don't think we'll read those unless we're bored. But it's also hard to find a place to stop that doesn't like have so many unanswered questions. Also, you have to be really careful with existentialism because you can have what's called an existential crisis, where something pesky like anguish, despair, and abandonment might start to overwhelm you when you think about things that you probably shouldn't be thinking about because you're experiencing comprehension at levels that the entire human society has tried to prevent you from having. So that was anguish. The anguish of choice. And when we speak of abandonment, one of Heidegger's favorite expressions, we merely mean to say that God does not exist. All right. When we speak of abandonment, one of Heidegger's favorite expressions, we merely mean to say that God does not exist, and that we must bear the full consequences of that assertion. Existentialists are strongly opposed to a certain type of secular morality that seeks to eliminate God. A certain kind... Okay. Hold on, I have to burp. Sorry. It was gonna be one of those quiet burps that is, like, awkward. I don't want to do it in front of the camera. Okay. I think he's throwing shade at the communists here. Existentialists are strongly opposed to a certain type of secular morality that seeks to eliminate God as painlessly as possible. Around 1880, when some French professors attempted to Around 1880, when some French professors attempted to formulate a secular morality, they expressed it more or less in these words: God is a useless and costly hypothesis, so we will do without it. However, if we are to have a morality, a civil society, and a law-abiding world, it is essential that certain values be taken seriously. They must have an a priori existence ascribed to them. There are certain values that must be taken seriously. They must have an a priori existence ascribed to them. It must be considered mandatory, a priori, for people to be honest, not to lie, not to beat their wives, to raise children, and so forth. We therefore will need to do a little more thinking on this subject in order to show that such values exist all the same. Good is good. Such values exist all the same, and that they are inscribed in an intelligible heaven, even though God does not exist. In other words, and I think this is the gist of everything that we in France call radicalism, nothing will have changed if God does not exist. We will encounter the same standards of honesty, progress, and humanism. And we will have turned God into an obsolete hypothesis that will die out quietly on its own. Existentialists, on the other hand, find it extremely disturbing that God no longer exists. Existentialists, on the other hand, find it very disturbing that God no longer exists. For along with his disappearance goes the possibility of finding values in an intelligible heaven. There could no longer be any a priori good, since there would be no infinite and perfect consciousness to conceive of it. Nowhere is it written that good exists, that we must be honest and not lie, since we are on a plane shared only by men. Dostoevsky once wrote, "If God does not exist, everything is permissible." This is the starting point of existentialism. Indeed, everything is permissible if God does not exist. And man is consequently abandoned. For he cannot find anything to rely on, neither within nor without. First, he finds there are no excuses. For if it is true that existence precedes essence, we can never explain our actions by reference to a given and immutable human nature. In other words, there is no determinism. Man is free. Man is freedom. If, however, God does not exist, we will encounter no values or orders that can legitimize our conduct. Thus, we have neither behind us nor before us, in the luminous realm of values, any means of justification or excuse. We are left alone and without excuse. This is what I mean when I say man is condemned to be free. Condemned because he did not create himself. Condemned because he did not create himself, yet nonetheless free. Because once cast into the world, he is responsible for all that he does. Existentialists do not believe in the power of passion. They will never regard a great passion as a devastating torrent which inevitably compels man to commit certain acts, and which therefore is an excuse. They think man is responsible for his own passion. Neither do existentialists believe that man can find refuge in some given sign that will guide him on earth. They think that man interprets the sign as he pleases. Yes, it is very interesting to consider this as written in 1945. Existentialism was deeply affected by the rise of fascism in the 20th century. Aye. Indeed, most indubitably. Anyways. And also, that's why it's very healing to read this to you all. Thank you for listening. And I'm glad you're enjoying it. I really am. There's a certain kind of existential horror that we've all become very familiar with, and I think some of us just haven't realized it yet. Because of bad faith and the masking of humanity's English. Anyways, neither do existentialists believe that man can find refuge in some given sign that will guide him on earth. They think that man interprets the sign as he pleases, and that man is therefore without any support or help, condemned at all times to invent man. In an excellent article, Francis Ponge once wrote, "Man is the future of man." This is absolutely true. However, if we were to interpret this to mean that such a future is inscribed in heaven, or that God knows what it is, that would be false. For then, it would no longer even be a future. If, on the other hand, it means that whatever man may appear to be, there is a future waiting to be created, a virgin future, then the saying is true. But for now, we are abandoned. To give you an example that will help you to better understand what we mean by abandonment, I will mention the case of one of my students who sought me out under the following circumstances. His father had broken off with his mother. This is juicy, chat, all right? We're getting into some drama. I'll mention the case of one of my students who sought me out under the following circumstances. His father had broken off with his mother, and moreover was inclined to be a collaborator. I don't know what that means. Something dramatic, I'm sure. And moreover was inclined to be a collaborator. His older brother... Ew. Banned. I don't need to buy followers. Stream promotion. Boo. Read a book, loser. Alright, his older brother had been killed in the German offensive of 1940. And this young man, with primitive but noble feelings, wanted to avenge him. Yeah, I can't tell if collaborator is like he wants to be a... His father broke off with his mother and moreover was inclined to be a collaborator. His older brother had been killed in the German offensive of 1940, and this young man with primitive but noble feelings wanted to avenge him. His mother, living alone with him, and deeply hurt by the partial betrayal of his father and the death of her oldest son, found her only comfort in him. At the time, the young man had the choice of going to England to join the Free French forces, which would mean abandoning his mother, or remaining by her side. To help her to go on with her life. He realized that his mother lived only for him, and that his absence, perhaps even his death, would plunge her into utter despair. I have to pee really bad when I'm trying to finish this fucking segment. He realized that his mother lived only for him and that his absence, perhaps his death, would plunge her into utter despair. He also realized that ultimately any action he might take on her behalf would provide the concrete benefit of keeping her alive, while any action that he might take to leave and fight would be of uncertain outcome and could disappear pointlessly, like water in sand, or like tears in the rain. For instance, in trying to reach England, he might pass through Spain and be detained there. He might be detained in Spain indefinitely in a camp. Or, after arriving in England or Algiers, he might be assigned to an office to do paperwork. He was therefore confronted by two totally different modes of action. One concrete and immediate, but directed only toward one individual. The other involving an infinitely vaster group, a national core, yet more ambiguous for that very reason, and which could be interrupted before being carried out. He had to choose between the two. And I will leave there so I can go pee.